Hi, everybody. Thanks for the time this morning. We're going to talk about a successful journey to private cellular, private LTE, and you all aren't here to hear me speak, so we'll start with if we could go down the row here and do a quick introduction, that'd be great.
All right, Wendall Reimer from Xcel Energy, and first I'd like to say welcome to Minneapolis. I know it's the end of the week, but hopefully you enjoyed the venue and the town and everything. We certainly appreciate it. My current role is overseeing our OT networks at Xcel and more the strategic side and deployment side, so overseeing our private LTE deployment as well as our RF mesh and field, and working closely with our business on 5 and 10 year strategy planning.
I'm J.J. Stutler, manager of the wireless engineering group for Evergy, based out of Kansas City, Topeka area. So thanks, Wendall, for having us here this year, and we look forward to having everybody in Kansas City next year. So our team is responsible for our private LTE deployment throughout our entire Evergy territory.
Good morning. I'm Chris Vana. I'm from Ameren out of St. Louis. My responsibilities at Ameren are that I'm responsible for architecture, engineering, and operations for much of our infrastructure work. So that includes the data centers and includes the databases, but primarily a lot of it's on the network side. And I oversee our private LTE, our IntelliGrid, our fiber build-outs, and all the major initiatives we have within our infrastructure groups.
Good morning. I'm Alan McIntyre. I'm the engineering director for SoLinc, and SoLinc is a subsidiary of Southern Company, and we have the pleasure and honor of operating Southern Company's LTE network that covers Georgia, Alabama, and parts of Mississippi.
My name is Bobby Sadler. I'm with the Lower Colorado River Authority, LCRA. It is not the Colorado River in Colorado. We're out of Central Texas, and I am the Senior Director of Infrastructure and Growth for Technology. I have a fairly varied background. About half my career is spent in the carrier world and half of it's spent in utilities. So I've built switch rooms for commercial carriers. I've done RF engineering. I've done RF engineering management. I've done large rollouts, and I kind of thought we were done with that when I ended up at LCRA, and look at this. Here we go again. So
Awesome. Well, thanks, everybody. And I'm Adam Nathan. I work at Worldwide Technology. I lead our utility and energy practice. And arguably my favorite part about the industry is the fact that we get to have these meaningful conversations and actually sharing the details, not just bragging about what we did, but talking about how we did it and working through it together. So, well, I'll start it off. You all have committed to private cellular and our private LTE and our and some varying stages of deployment, but and a lot of the folks in the audience are sort of at that beginning stage of trying to get the business case over the line and get going. Could we start with Wendall and maybe go down the line a bit here and just speak to how you structured the commitment? So, rate-based or not, FCC auction versus a private purchase, and then also what were the key drivers for the business executives, the CEOs, boards, and so forth as you got that commitment?
Sure. I could talk all day on that, so I'll try and condense it. And I should ask Bobby, make sure nobody takes a picture of me looking like I'm sleeping, like came out of a... It's hilarious for those that know what I'm talking about. So I'll back up and I'll make 3 statements, which really was the premise for what we do. Number one, we have had a strategy within our company on the OT side to be private from end to end since about 2016 when we laid out that strategy. So it's always been a strategy. And as many of you know, we did that fun stuff with CBRS and WiMAX, which went really well with the FCC. And we pivoted to public cellular because we had timelines that we had committed our in the states that we operate. And that's been going really well. And the RF mesh is incredible, and it's created a lot of confidence. Secondly, I'll say that we approached this topic not as a private LTE justification. We first did what's our business scenario and where are we going? And that involved, as you've heard, and you heard yesterday from our executives, that in essence, and this wasn't my day job, by the way, meeting and strategizing with each of our business units, gas, distribution, transmission, generation, and the customer side, how many devices do we got today, where are we going, and what's your 5-year capital and O&M budget, right? A lot of you will go, why'd you do that? That's what drives our business. That's what drives our rate cases. That's where, the funding comes from. That's, where you always start. So we were very factually based. How many devices we got? What are you planning for next year, the year after, whatever. And then we got into 10-year projections, 20, whatever. But it really was factually based on our 5-year capital and O&M budgets and device counts that were going to be deployed. Then we took a snapshot of, here's our networks that we have in place. We've all done that. And that's where we started. So it was a business evaluation that would then lead to a technology solution versus, hey, how do we justify private LTE? And the reason we did that is if you start saying you're trying to justify private LTE, you try and fit everything into that scenario of what private LTE is rather than stepping back and really looking at your business. So we took that opportunity the first 6 months, and this goes back, 2.5 years, to really educate our executives on this part of the business because they don't think about it, right? And out of that came the metrics, and so we had our facts, which is our tactical approach to things we need to solve in the next 5 years, and then we had our strategic. And I did one presentation in 21 to our executive committee that didn't say, hey, I want 150 million or 300 million was what it was at then. I said, here's the state. I want to take the next 6 months and do a business case, and they're all like, yes, great, do it. They're all excited about it. And then we got a lot of them, new executives. We had 2 new OpCo presidents who at the end of the day were the deciding factors. And we educated them over time. Here's what private LTE is. Here's what Ameren is doing. Here's what, the proverbial SoLinc is doing, the masters at this. And here's others considering it, and all the players, and here's the spectrum, and da-da-da-da-da. And they said, yeah, absolutely. And then I had to give them, monthly and quarterly updates, and that, helped us lead to the point where 2 years later, that's how long it takes. I know the vendors just love that timeline, but that's about the average for, basically a $200 million program to get approval at the board. But by the time we got there, and for those that you heard Tim O'Connor yesterday, he plays 2 roles. One is the governance, because he's got to sign the checks. But number 2 is he looked at his business, operators, transmission, distribution, gas, and generation, and he looked at them and said, hey, and they go, yeah, those are our numbers. Yes, we agree to it, and let's go. So I'll just caveat that. We could talk more, but that was really how we started the program and drove everything up to board level decision.
So Evergy is a combination of a merger from Kansas City Power and Light and Westar Energy. So one of the things that kind of really drove our implementation of private LTE was that merger and some regulatory commitments that we made, things like that. But grid modernization, making the grid more stable, better rates to the ratepayers, things like that. So we had a very supportive executive team that supported us in this. We evaluated several different things, several different technologies, private LTE being one, fiber build-outs, upgrades, DWDM, MPLS upgrades, a lot of different technological things. But it kept falling back that private LTE was a great way to go. We jumped in and purchased spectrum. We evaluated the spectrum. We figured out that our network that we had today, as far as our tower sites, we got roughly about 135 tower sites in a 49,000 square mile area. We figured out that the 900 megahertz anterix band was going to be a great fit for us. We already had a 900 megahertz LMR network deployed across the area, so we knew what the coverage looked like. We knew where it would and wouldn't work. So we decided to pull the trigger there. So we got that spectrum. Since then we've gotten more spectrum. We participated last year in auction 108. We knew that we were going to need to keep evolving the network, just like we've evolved from token ring, 10 megabits, 100 megabits, gigabits, and beyond. We knew we were going to need more spectrum to have more services. So one of the first things that we did is we went to every business unit. We went to the business and said, hey, if we build this network, how would you use it? And we met with transmission distribution, we met with fleet, we met with every department within our company and said, hey, if we build it, how would you use it? And we had some folks that kind of looked at us and scratched their head and said, well, we really hadn't thought about this yet. And then we had others that were like, hey, we would do this and this and this, and we're already very dependent on the public carriers today. And so once we started looking at what we already had on the public carriers and what that cost was, what our O&M was, it just made the business case even more, more feasible. So it was a pretty easy sell, honestly. So my vice president sitting back here, he may have a different opinion, but from my perspective, it was a pretty easy sell when you start running the numbers and looking at it. So we've embraced it, and we're kind of in the tactical stage of it now, head down, building sites and getting the cores running and all of that. So, but it's been a process.
So you're starting to hear a theme after the first two. You're hearing telecom costs, you're hearing business involvement. At Ameren, we looked at where's the grid headed? What's the smart grid going to do? This was 8 years ago, 9 years ago. And we looked at where are our costs. And so when we talked to the business guys and said, what do you expect your growth is going to do? What's IntelliGrid going to, or what's the smart grid going to do to you? What are you going to put out there? And the answer is, well, it's a digital utility eventually. It's more data, it's coming across, better sensors, better this. And you start to lay it out there and you say, how are we going to support that? Every one of us, we have that problem. How are we going to support the growth of sensors and data requirements across the grid? And so the answer is, we'll put more modems out there, or we'll get another lease line to that location. And one of the smart things that Ameren did was that we pulled all of those telecom costs together, and we started paying them out of the business budgets instead of the digital or the IT budgets. And by moving those costs into the business budgets, they're now looking at it saying, holy cow, I'm paying X amount per modem every time I put a modem out, and I just gave you a plan that says I want to have a factor of 10 times this number of modems in 10 years or 15 years. And so they're looking at saying, is that even sustainable? And our answer is probably not. Plus, you're at the whim of the telecom carriers when they want to discontinue something, when they want to force you to go to 5G, when they want to upgrade this. You're now rolling trucks. How do we regain our control? And so now we're looking at saying, okay, we've got a financial incentive that says if we can start getting out of our telecom costs, our wireless costs, our different costs, that feeds into the business case. We've got a control incentive that says we now get to control our network, roll it out at our cost, upgrade it when we need to, and then we get the capability of essentially being private, where we get to do what we want on it and not have to share different components with other public people, which that makes our cyber people happy. And so that conversation happened with the business coming to digital and digital coming to the business. It wasn't a technology solution looking for a home. It was a business problem looking for a solution. And what that meant is that our business people engaged on day one. And by having the business people engaged on day one, you've now got the core company that's making your technical argument about where you're going, and then they trust the technical people to come up with solutions, and then we leverage all of the ecosystem of partners and technologists we have here, and that ends up driving the business case. So that happened to us in the mid-teens. At this point, we've spent about 10 years rolling out fiber across our entire territory. So we got 5,500 miles of fiber that we're just wrapping up this year on our first major effort, and that's a good thing because that killed a lot of the lease lines. So we're seeing the benefits already. Then we tied the wireless component and the cellular modems and the private LTE as a phase 2 to that IntelliGrid strategy we're working on. And what that allows us to do is already have successes as we start to invest in the growth of the wireless. So where we are today is that we've got our cores in, we've got towers up, we've got devices communicating, we've got different components that are working on the network exactly like we said they would, and we're working through the early game challenges. So we're up in the, by the end of the year, we'll be in the 300 to 400 devices. That's not a lot. That doesn't stress the systems, but it proves that the production systems are working. And to select and to get there, we went through all the proof of concepts. We went through all the vendors. We went through the RFPs. We brought everything together. We tested all the use cases, and I've got a whole list of use cases I can talk about. But the core, most fundamental thing to get it there was work with the business. And then I'll even answer the question, yes, we put it in the rate base. We got it into the rate cases. We got the commissions engaged, and we made it so that we had to justify it to our commissions and made a commitment to them that we would do it. And as a utility, when you make that commitment to a commission, you have to do it. And that meant we weren't backing out. And so we're continuing full speed ahead, and we're making great progress.
Yeah, I wanted I'll look at Bobby and make sure I think Rob Schwartz alluded to this yesterday. You know, we had a summit in Birmingham in 2019. I think we can say it was official, maybe, I don't know. But so, you know, in 2019, I want to take a second to reflect. I mean, in 2019, I think we were the only ones really with a private LTE network at the time. And so now we're sitting on the stage with, you know, these utilities, there's others, SDG&E and others that have deployed LTE 4 years. It's pretty impressive. So one of the questions we got, and you know, we were doing our business case in 2011 and 12, was what are other utilities doing? We didn't have a good answer to that. You got a good answer today. So I think that's one point. We did rate base our cell sites. So anything that goes in a state is rate based to that state's utility. So Georgia Power, Alabama Power, Mississippi Power. The common assets are actually SoLinc assets that are unregulated. And that allows us to do a few things that maybe we'll talk about later. But really from us, the key points that hit home at Southern, there's really three. It's reliability, resiliency, and security. And let me give a little bit of definition around those. I mean, I think you've heard those in these other sessions a good bit, but reliability to us is you can design, when you do private LTE, you can design in as much redundancy as you want. And so on a cell site basis, you can have the, you know, generator backup or fuel cell, and it can keep power, you know, there for a week without being connected to the grid. You can do redundant transport to the site. So you have a lot of control on what you do to keep that cell site up, no matter what's going on. That's a big deal to us. Think about where we are. We get tornadoes, hurricanes pretty consistently throughout the year. And so resiliency then is the ability, even with all that redundancy, something's still going to happen. I mean, I can tell you it does. And so how do you respond and get the cell sites back up and the network restored quickly? So we have a fleet of mobile assets, you know, a lot of different techniques we do to hit that mark. And we've got stats that show our performance versus, you know, maybe public carriers after hurricanes, and it's a pretty big difference. And then security. I think, you know, one thing we did, we included security from day one. They were embedded with us as we developed our network. I think when, you know, I would recommend the book Wireless Wars. If you haven't read it, you ought to. It's a pretty interesting view. And, you know, one thing is network equipment side, but I think devices are where, and I think Congress just sent a letter to the FCC about this. You know, think about the modules, the chipsets, the devices, you know, the country of the, you know, the country that maybe controls the company that's doing some of that. And so I think there's a big piece of cyber, and way we view it is, you know, I think the earlier session on Zero Trust was talking about, you know, castles. It's really a castle on an island, you know, honestly. And so we can operate OT traffic disconnected from the rest of the world, basically. And so, I mean, that's a pretty good cyber position. And, you know, when a nation state wants to attack, I mean, they're going to figure out a way. And the more we can separate, you know, in our view, telecommunications networks out there from utility networks, it's probably a good thing. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, thanks. LCRA got in the 900 business back in the 90s. We started deploying our EDAX system, and we operate as a commercial carrier for certain entities in Central Texas. So we were already in the 900 business, and I got here in 2010 to roll out the new radio system coming from a carrier world, and we're talking, and they said, yeah, this does data better than the old system. It's like, okay, great. How much data are we talking about? 9,600. 9,600. And I'm looking around for Doc Brown and Marty McFly and the DeLorean. I was like, great, okay. Hair on fire. This is awesome. Southern Company, meanwhile, we'll talk about Alan, is they're doing these other things. It's like, well, why can they do that and we can't? Well, they have different spectrum. You know, they had an opportunity to get some spectrum back in the 90s, and their spectrum's different than ours. Okay, fast forward to 2014. This FCC filing comes out, and I remember sitting in Jason Irvin's office when this came out. Jason Irvin, y'all probably heard him speak or talk, and he's running for the board. But this FCC filing came out, and it's like, well, who's this PDV company and what do they want to do? What? I remember Googling them and fast forward years later, wouldn't have guessed back then, but they would be, became Anterix and would be a great partner for us to do this. And it's all about getting opportunity and seizing opportunity in my mind. There's a lot of details, but a lot of smart people in this room. You kind of know straight up whether, your organization, this is a good fit or not. You can see that from a high level, and I always see the building first, right? I want to see the building first before I see the building blocks, and these guys have great points on. You got to dig in the business cases and justify it there, but big picture, you kind of know, wow, that's the future. And I know a lot of utilities talk about how do we get to be the utility of the future, and they have grand plans for all the applications. And what's very often forgotten is, okay, what's the middle piece look like? How am I going to support that? And for those of us that do the middle piece, you got to be 5 or 10 years ahead of what they want to do. And so we see what the utility of the future is. We kind of know what that looks like in our head, but you got to build the infrastructure. And in order to get buy-in from executives, which I think the question is you need some visionaries. You really need some visionaries. So back in 2014, when we're sitting in Jason's office and Jason says, what if? What if? And you need some three-dimensional thinking. It's like, here's how we're doing business today, but what if we were able to do something different? And once you start with those what ifs, you start building the case. You start saying, okay, what if? And you bring other things in, right? It's not about how am I doing business today. It's about how can I operate in the future to be more resilient, better, faster, quicker, more responsive. How can I serve my customers better? And so once you start building those blocks, you build the business case. And we went through, like I say, this has been a journey for us. It's been since 2014 that we've been doing this. And we built the business cases and we got it past the executives and build that case. And then you get an executive like Ken Price that comes in, and you're going to hear Ken speak later, and he's going to talk about this. And he's the guy that's really able to drive this home for us. And so it's been an exciting journey. We're at stage 1, right? We just finished stage 1, and now we're going to go build this thing. So excited to be here.
Thanks, everybody. Yeah, I want to go off something, Wendall. Everyone mentioned this is a journey. It's a lot. It's a process. We operate at utility speed, and there's a reason for it. But is there anything in your experience that you did during that process where you feel like a step you didn't have to take, or something that could have been more efficient? That if you had to do it again, you would have done a little differently?
No. I really can't think of anything, because that first year or two was a journey, right? And I think it's one thing to be able to say, boy, we should do this. This is really good. Let's take the next, 5 years and do it. The reason we do what we do, right, this group here, is supporting our business units and our customers, right? And sometimes the business units have an idea to do something, and you're either there to help them or you're going to get out of the way, right? And knowing when to do that is a trick and a mystery. But a lot of times, I go back to doing our RF mesh, which in WiMAX was, we made a commitment to the customers in Colorado and the PUC to deliver AMI at certain dates. Now, it turns out those dates slip, but as we all know, if you're going to be successful in that, I always had a goal, and still do, which my teams just love, to be 6 months ahead of any device deployment that needs our network. And we track that. And if we're at 5 months and 2 days, the project's yellow. If we're at 4 months, it's red. Even though they haven't even put the meter out there, I never want to delay a meter deployment or a device deployment or anything without the network being there. That's why we're there, right? And so that has carried on, and then the leadership got used to those kind of reporting. So, when we do the private LTE, we got to get ahead of them. And I got questioned on that a lot, because, 6 months, that's a long time. And I go, no, it's not, particularly when you're 64 years old, it's not. So, I'm thinking through, I'm sure there's something, if, tonight I go, oh God, I should have said that. but so much it kind of goes back to having visionaries and others. IT typically looks at things in 3 to 5 year cycles. This is a 30-year cycle. This is strategic. So one of the chances I took is when we did the factual side of it, that's tactical. We knew these devices were going out. We knew we had to support it, but we also knew it didn't meet the IRR that we look for in utilities. But we did it anyway, right? And we laid it out there, and I think when we started, I think we were at a negative 0.7, which means it's not, you probably shouldn't do this. But we laid out the strategic, and our leadership's goal was bring that 0.7 down to something more reasonable, and we actually got it to a negative 0.5, which our CFO goes, depending on these assumptions, you got facts and you got assumptions, and we listed out our 20 assumptions, and that's what we talked about. You can challenge the assumptions and you might be right, but at the end of the day, they go, we agree with those assumptions, and the strategic side of it is where those are. And that just created opportunity, and said, we got to build the foundation, got to build the house. You've heard it from these folks, and we're doing that right now. And then all these other things, EVs, and it's not really DERMS, right, driving private LTE, it's the connectivity DERMS needs to be successful. EVs, batteries, microgrids, whatever goes into that, and we're going to be ready for that. From a network perspective, what they do with that data, that's somebody else's problem. But we're going to give them a lot of data.
So I'll talk about a couple of things that we did right. I'm fortunate at Ameren, and many of you guys know John Hughes. I'll call him out. John Hughes is one of the visionaries behind a lot of this. Alan, you're one of the visionaries behind a lot of this. What we did right is that we had a recognition that as utilities we share. And we recognize that if we're going to share utilities and we're going to actually go in this direction, then we want to start standardizing, getting people aligned to interoperability in the same technologies. And that's how UBBA was born. That's how we're all here today, is that the guys in the room said, how do we share everything possible? And the sharing is something we do right. We're doing it right here this week, but Ameren, we've hosted more than a dozen utilities on site over the last year just to meet with us and talk about private LTE. Where are we going there? You talked about a summit that you had in 2019. You had a summit 3 weeks ago. We want to continue to share and share the knowledge, because it's better for each one of us that are already on the journey if you're following the same path. Because if the technology deviates from where we are today, that hurts us, because now we're on a different technology as where the industry's going. So we want to keep it together. We've done that right. We've all done that right. We have a monthly utility call where telecom experts get together, and it's been in place for 4 years. And we continue to meet and talk about whatever comes up, where our problems, whatever. Utility only, so that we can share real things, because we share. And my personal plug on that is that meeting is today at noon, and we'll have a room if anybody wants to join and get engaged in the monthly utility only call. It's in the A.J. Erling meeting room. You're welcome to join us. It's from noon to 2 today. We've been doing it every month for 4 years, and I chair that meeting, and I'm proud of it because we get a lot of good knowledge. But that sharing is critical. It is absolutely critical. What I think that we didn't do as well, though, is that we've made this a technology problem, and we haven't consistently managed to make it a business problem as much as we should. If you look around, you're going to see all of our technology friends, all of our telecom friends, all of our technology vendors, but you're not seeing the presence of the business guys that have the problems that we're solving. And it really needs to become where we evolve from being just technology and into business and technology in a true partnership. And that means that you meet with your business every day while you're doing projects like this. It means that they can represent technology if they go to a conference, or a technologist can represent the business if they go to the conference, and you become one entity. And we got to continue to evolve there. We didn't get that right yet, but I'm not sure we could have, and I think it's time for us to evolve. So that's what we've done right, and that's where I see us still needing to continue to go.
Yeah, I kind of just real quickly, I was known as John's shadow for about 3 years. He casts a big shadow. But I think one of the things I really respect out of this group here, and going back to even Alan, because he gets picked on a lot, because they were the first. We collectively share responsibility to this organization and the industry to take what we're learning and help others, move secondly. I think that is a critical part of why we are a part of UBBA, is to, help people learn from what we've been through.
Yeah, I was going to say one thing we missed on, and it kind of comes back now, it's really a positive, but at the time, I think it was a big miss. So device projections, when we went with our business case, a lot of folks said, you can't show it, shooting up. I mean, people won't believe you. I mean, that's just, it's crazy. And so we did a 50% growth, over out to 2020. We were at 300% in 2020 in actuality, and now we're like over 400%. So don't be scared to show the reality.
And in a lot of cases, that device growth, that doesn't count the meters.
That's right.
The AMI 2.0 concept and all that's coming on to private LTE, when we did our justifications, we didn't want to include that because that's a scary number. Now you're adding millions of devices instead of tens of thousands. When that comes on, your business case suddenly, oh, of course, it's phenomenal because the meters are included. You're up in the full utilization range.
Yeah, I'll say the collaboration is key. And I don't know if anybody here watches the Tour de France. Any Tour de France watchers or something like that, cycling, right? There's not a guy that goes out there and wins the Tour de France. You may see the guy that wins on TV, but it's not a guy that wins that race. There's a cycling team with him, right? And that's why he wins the race. Beyond that, there's all kinds of support teams that are riding along with them. And it's so fantastic to watch because you got a guy that'll change a flat tire while they're still riding. And they just keep going. It's amazing. And so if you're looking at this, if you're in the early stages, you got to build that team around you. And this right here, this is my cycling team. Right, I have these guys on speed dial, which is unusual, and people have said this. In the carrier world, that doesn't happen. In the utility world, we collaborate. This is my cycling team, and you need to build that cycling team around you. Call us, call the people around you. In addition to that, you've got, I'm gonna talk about our partner Annex a little bit. They're the guys out front that are staging everything. They're building the stuff. That we can have that cycling team ride. And then you've got other partners that you'll go along with, that you'll build your team around you that can come change your tire while you're riding, right? But build that team around you while you're looking at this, and that's going to be key. From a rollout success, I can tell you from my experience, you really need people that know what they're doing when they build this stuff and when they plan it for you. Your site build plans and your construction plans are going to be key to your success. And I think the guys that are already doing this will tell you that that's a big part of what you do when you roll this out, and your success is, what does that look like? So you really need good people around you that can help you along the way. Don't try to do it yourself as a utility. I mean, there's people out there that can help you.
Awesome. Thanks. Well, and I do want to double click on something that Alan brought up. He said, you mentioned we've been here, 4 years later, it's a whole different organization, a lot of momentum. And with that, there's a lot more choice. There's a lot more, like architecturally, there's a lot more options. The market has really evolved. More spectrum, more roaming, more MOCN and MORAN, and just things that, you all didn't have to think about. Do you have any suggestions for how to avoid analysis paralysis and how to take those steps forward?
Yeah, I can jump in on that. And I kind of alluded to it with the core. So we're trying to, provide an opportunity for utilities with a core as a service offering to really have that easy button to get started. I think I talked about the RAN, and that's where you can really hone in your reliability and resiliency piece. It would allow the utilities to build their RAN and then connect to our core. And so we can do packet gateways on site and keep the user plane data with the utility. So there's a lot, and we've vetted this obviously with our security. So we really, and it kind of simplifies SIMs and devices and things like that as well. So it's really, we want to make it as quick and easy as possible to stand up a private LTE network. So, and obviously that didn't exist when we got started, but even if it's a trial, I think we're game for that.
I'll add one, because it actually became a really intriguing conversation with our leadership, and that is trying to evaluate every possible business case within your company before making a decision is going to kill your program, guarantee it. And a lot of them are still theoretical. A lot of them, like even DERMS, it, in my opinion, is still theoretical, but it's going to mature rather rapidly over the next 2 or 3 years, right? That wasn't part of our business case, right? EV chargers kind of was, but we weren't quite sure as a company when and where we were going to do it, but we certainly said, hey, we'll support you. So on our original business case, we had the price over the cost of cell modems in our business case for the next 10 years. It was a big number, right? Somewhere between 10 and 20 million, potentially. Our executives go, no, we're going to take that out. And every business case that comes along, whether it's EVs, whether it's drones, whether whatever, they got to justify the cost of those cell modems within their program, and they'll follow our standard. That's a big change, to look at. So keeping your scope tight on what you truly are deploying from private LTE versus satisfying every single possible business case is one of the things that I think your leadership and you need to buy into.
I think analysis paralysis comes from, I'm going to say 4 things. One is not understanding the problem, so you're stuck. Number 2, the technology is not there to support you, so you're stuck. Number 3, the timing isn't right, the support above you isn't there, and you don't have the ability to move it forward because the support's not there. And number 4, you don't have the confidence to move it forward. And all of those weigh in on all of us at different times. To get over analysis paralysis for Ameren in this environment, we had to get the support all the way to the top. We had to get the business and the leadership and the president and the board to understand why we have to do this. And once they understood it, the support falls in place, your confidence goes up, and then our problem was, is the technology ready, and do we truly understand the problem? And those are things all of us know how to deal with. That's what we do with for a living. That's how the networks have evolved for the last 50 years by all of us in this room. So it really comes down to, how do we make sure our executives enable us to move this thing forward? Because until they're ready, it doesn't really matter if we're ready. Once they're ready to get it into the rate case, and that's where timing comes in, because sometimes you got to line it up to the rate cases. That's where we need to get advocates at EEI and at the different other events where the executives attend and get them understanding where this market is going and why the technology is important and how it's going to support the business goals and the business strategies. And it means that we have to understand the business goals and business strategies so that we can put the right message in the right person's ear and build that support. And so analysis paralysis will continue until you can resolve those 4 things. And once those 4 things are resolved, now you got somebody kicking the butt trying to get it done. And I kind of like being in that position rather than being in the stuck position.
Yeah, and you got to have that vision too. And right now, people going through the gate, like some of these guys did already, the question is why? Why are we doing this, right? Pretty soon, the question is going to flip to, well, why aren't we doing this? Right, and so your executives are going to start to ask, why is everybody else doing this and we are not? So I would prepare for that now. Get that vision built now. Get that strategy built now, because like these guys said, it's a journey and it takes time. Because that's going to be asked at some point, and we all want to be prepared for those questions when they come.
We saw a pretty quick payback on all of the devices we had on a public carrier. And, we were already relying on LTE. We saw what Southern was doing. We saw what Ameren was doing. We saw, what our peers were doing. And it just made sense to build our own. And that's why we've been able to accelerate. And, we knew that the business cases would evolve and would come along. And this was a technology that obviously is not going anywhere because it is, in the carrier world. So, we, dove in, over our head, and here we are. We're going as fast as we can. So, and it's all been because we collaborated, and we've been to Southern, we've been to Ameren, we've been to the other utilities that are working on this and seen what's going on, and had the discussions amongst ourselves.
Awesome. So you make the decision, and now you got to get the cycling team together, right? You got to get on the bike. You got to start getting the wheels moving. Now that you're all in that and the wheels are moving, was there anything you would do differently? Were there people you didn't involve early on you would have, or things you would have done as you're building that team?
Our security team, I will tell you, I had a fellow that's pretty pretty heavily involved in our project early on, said get your security team involved today. And actually we should have got our security team involved 2 months before that. That's one of the things that we've, has kind of slowed us down. Getting those guys involved day one, getting their buy-in. We started down the path and we got to the point where it's like, yeah, we probably better get them involved, and brought them in the door, and they're like, what the heck are you guys doing? Wait a minute. No, you're not doing it this way. So, make sure you get your security team involved right off the bat. The other thing for us is, and I know for some others, is been your SIM vendors and your SIM process. Start that process early. Get that process going.
Yeah, number one, I'll echo that. We had the distinct pleasure of having our security team assign just an amazing individual, Brian, to our project before we even did RFPs, right? So having them during the RFP and getting not only their security knowledge, but their broader perspective had really helped us. The other thing I'll say is that I think we wish we would have started earlier is we've heard a few people talk about it. Private LTE is a little bit different than other purpose-built networks, obviously, because we're covering the entire company. That's 8 states. That's 3 different business cases. Different riders come into play. We're envisioning that we will probably have 15 different methods in our company of recovering our costs for private LTE. If any of you have ever had to go through these rate cases, been witnesses, do the shadow files, do all these different things they do in finance, it's not fun. And you don't want to distract your technical team on that. And I should have mentioned, our OpCo presidents were the last people our CEO turned to and said, you guys have the last vote on whether we're doing private LTE. And each one of them said yes. And they told us how they want each OpCo to do their rate cases. I would have, and I've had the distinct pleasure of being a witness on rate cases before, I would have started that earlier. But we had 2 new OpCo presidents. Because you got to think about how you're going to recover this and the impact to our ratepayers and everything else, because this is not cheap. It's not cheap to build, it's not cheap to run. So that's one thing I would have started earlier. But
I'd say, use case, I think we've talked about this before, but use cases, having those tied down to what you're really looking for is pretty key, because if there's any type of application development, something new, that's what we got into. Being kind of ahead on some of the things we wanted to do, like MCPTT and other things. It was painful, and honestly, it was a little bit of a timing thing. You get into the budgets, and you need to convert, and you don't want to run another system longer, and you got to pay money, and so there was never enough time, it seemed like, to get all that done. So any kind of development, because I'm not sure, like, at least I'll say it's a weakness for us, like some of that application development, it's more time consuming and a little different skill set than maybe what core competencies are. And so the more you can plan that out and get ahead of it, the better off. So if I had something to do over, some of that would be in there for sure.
At this point, we've missed so many people that we should have gotten involved earlier, that I celebrate the people we did get involved so we could get to where we are. But when I look back, simple things, architecturally, SIM cards, they weren't ready when we were ready. Things aren't quite there. There's still technical components that, wow, we wish we would have known that earlier and gotten there. The other thing that I'm looking at of who do I need to get involved is that now that we're building, I heard third grid. This is the third grid. You got your gas, you got your electric, and this is your third network, or whatever you want to call it. And so then the natural question is, how do I monetize it? How do I monetize it if you invest in private LTE? We're barely trying to monetize people putting stuff on our towers, right? So now we've got a private LTE network, and you say, can you monetize it? What's the impact of that? What's the reg rel? Are you even allowed to when you get into the laws and into the regulations of the different states? And if you have multiple states, it's different rules and that's a group that I'm interested in seeing how that plays out and where that goes. I'm not upset that we didn't get them engaged early, because I didn't need them yet. But the questions are going to change, because as you have an asset, people want to leverage the asset. So it's going to be fun. And I see us on this board, or on this dais, we're trying to talk about how we monetize it. How do we serve? How do we create a core that's available for others to use and start to leverage it? Because it's an investment, and we want to get out of that investment. We want to get something back from it, more than just what our business case said.
Well, I did want to open it up for Q&A, but the panel shared quite a bit, and we are out of time. But I just want to thank everybody for your insight and the partnership, and for everybody's time, and for Bobby and the whole organization for everything you do and this wonderful event. Thanks, everybody.